Two people are 68. One stays up too late, eats a heavy dinner, and spends the next day mostly sitting. By the following morning, she feels like herself again. The other has the same kind of week, and the consequences follow him around. A late night costs him 2 days. A big meal flattens his afternoon. A stressful call at 4 is still with him at 11. Neither of them is sick. Their test results look broadly similar. The usual assumption is that one body has more damage than the other. That is not really what separates them. What separates them is responsiveness. A younger functioning body is not a body without wear. It is a body that is still good at correcting. And responsiveness is not automatic. Your body maintains it based on the signals it keeps receiving. 6 ordinary habits keep those signals clear, and each one speaks to a different system. Let's begin with the one your body uses to organize everything else. How does your body know what time it is? Not the clock on the wall. Every cell in your liver, your muscles, your gut, and your blood vessels runs on a daily schedule. Enzymes rise and fall. Hormones follow a curve. Your body temperature moves in a predictable arc across 24 hours, and all of those separate schedules need to agree with each other. There is a master clock in your brain in a small region of the hypothalamus that broadcasts the time to everything else. Think of thousands of clocks in a building that all need to be set from one central signal. If the central signal is strong, everything stays coordinated. If it becomes faint, the individual clocks begin to drift apart from one another. Now, what sets that master clock? Primarily light arriving through your eyes, which leads to something worth sitting with. You can spend 8 hours in bed and still give your body a very weak signal about what time it is. Consider a common day. You wake before sunrise and turn on a lamp. You stay indoors, where the light is a small fraction of outdoor brightness even on a cloudy day. Late afternoon comes and goes with no real change. The evening stays brightly lit. The TV is on until 11. From the master clock's point of view, that entire day was one long stretch of medium light. There was no clear morning. There was no clear night. Just a flat line where a curve should have been. And here's why this matters more after 60. The circadian system tends to weaken with age on its own. Melatonin output declines. The temperature rhythm flattens somewhat. Rest and activity become more fragmented. Research using constant conditions suggests the amplitude of the master signal itself diminishes with age. So the internal signal is already becoming quieter, which makes the external one matter more, not less. And there is a second change working in the same direction, in the eye itself. The lens gradually yellows with age, and yellowing filters out short wavelength blue light preferentially. Blue light is exactly the part of the spectrum the clock-setting cells in your retina respond to most strongly. So the same room at the same brightness delivers a somewhat weaker time signal at 70 than it did at 30, which is a genuinely useful thing to know, because it means the fix is not subtle indoor adjustments. It is getting outside, where the light is measured in tens of thousands of units rather than hundreds. And this is the reframe. The goal is not more sleep. It is a bigger difference between your day and your night. Get outdoor light reasonably early, even briefly, even when it is overcast. Outdoor light is far brighter than indoor lighting, and your eyes register that difference. Keep your wake time reasonably consistent, because the clock reads regularity as information. And let your evenings actually become evenings, dimmer, quieter, less stimulating, rather than an extension of the afternoon. A body with clear timing knows when to be active and when to repair. A body with blurred timing has to guess. If explanations like this, where an ordinary habit turns out to have a mechanism underneath it, are useful to you, subscribing helps this channel reach more people. But timing is only one kind of signal. There is another one your body receives every time you eat. Picture 2 people eating the identical meal. Same food, same portion, same time of day. One finishes and sits down in a chair for the next 2 hours. The other spends several minutes on their feet, clearing up, walking to the mailbox, moving around the kitchen. Same meal, different metabolic response. Here's what is happening underneath, and it centers on a tissue most people never think of as metabolic. Skeletal muscle is one of the largest destinations for glucose arriving from a meal. When a muscle contracts, it needs fuel immediately, and it pulls glucose out of the bloodstream to get it. Crucially, contraction can increase glucose uptake through a route that operates alongside insulin, rather than depending entirely on it. So a contracting muscle is actively helping to clear the meal. A resting muscle is simply present. Controlled studies have tested this directly. Adults spent hours sitting in a laboratory under different conditions. When they broke up that sitting with short walking breaks, their glucose and insulin responses after meals were lower than when they sat continuously. And notably, light walking was enough. This was not about exercise intensity. Now, an important limit. This does not cancel a heavy meal, and it does not prevent any disease. The claim is narrower and more interesting than that. What we are describing is a transition. Fuel arrives, and the body has to shift from one state to another. A responsive body handles that shift smoothly. A less responsive body handles it with larger swings and takes longer to settle. Metabolic youth is largely the ability to absorb a change in fuel without the system becoming overwhelmed. And this becomes more relevant with age for a structural reason. Muscle is the largest single destination for that glucose. And most people have somewhat less of it at 70 than at 40. A smaller destination means the same meal has fewer places to go, which makes what that muscle is doing at the time matter more, not less. The practical version requires no plan and no equipment. After the 1 or 2 meals in your day that are genuinely substantial, avoid becoming completely motionless. A few minutes on your feet is not a workout. It is a signal arriving at the moment the fuel does. The next one is unusual, because it has less to do with exercise than with the environment you built around yourself. Think about how much physical effort has quietly disappeared from an ordinary day. The elevator instead of 2 flights. The closest parking space. Groceries delivered rather than carried. The remote control for everything. Every one of those decisions is reasonable. Nobody chose them to avoid effort. They chose them because they were easier. And easier is a legitimate thing to want. But consider the accumulated result. Your body determines what capacity to maintain based on what it is repeatedly asked to do. Tissue is expensive to keep. Muscle costs energy. Bone density costs resources. Maintaining capacity is a metabolic decision, not a courtesy. So when your environment stops requesting a capacity, your body eventually stops funding it. Here is the framing that makes this useful. Your environment is not neutral. It functions as a training program, or as a detraining program, whether or not you think of it that way. A home with stairs you actually use makes a request every day. A home where every task has been optimized for convenience makes almost none. There is a particular moment when this accelerates, and it is worth naming. Retirement removes an enormous amount of unplanned physical demand in a single week. The commute, the stairs at the office, the walking between buildings. A house move can do the same thing. A single-level home eliminates every stair in one afternoon. Nothing about those changes is wrong, but they are large, sudden reductions in demand, and they usually happen without anything replacing them. And this is why 2 people with identical exercise habits can diverge. One of them exercises for 30 minutes and then lives inside an environment designed to eliminate effort. The other exercises the same amount and then carries the laundry, walks to the shop, and takes the stairs without thinking about it. Now, I want to be clear about what this is not. This is not an argument for making your life harder or refusing help you need. Convenience exists for good reasons, and some of it is genuinely necessary. The point is to stop removing the last remaining pieces of useful physical effort from a life that already has very few. Keep the stairs you can safely climb. Carry what you can safely carry. Park a little farther when weather and safety allow. Convenience saves effort today. Unlimited convenience quietly removes the reason to preserve effort tomorrow. And physical demand has another dimension that effort alone does not cover. Watch how an adult actually moves through a normal day, and something becomes apparent. The vocabulary is remarkably small. You walk forward, you sit down and stand up. You reach for things at roughly chest height. You turn slowly and in wide arcs. Notice what is missing. Reaching fully overhead, rotating the trunk, bending deeply, getting down to the floor and back up, moving sideways or backward. Walking, for all its value, uses a narrow slice of what your joints can do. So think about what happens over a decade of that. Your body does not only track how strong you are, it tracks the positions you still visit. A range you have not used in years becomes unfamiliar. Not necessarily damaged, unfamiliar. And several things contribute to that unfamiliarity together. The joint capsule and surrounding tissues adapt to the range they habitually experience. The muscles at the far end of that range are rarely asked to produce force there, so they become weak in exactly the position where you need control most. and your nervous system loses familiarity with the position. It has fewer recent examples of how to organize your body there. That last part matters, because it means the sensation of stiffness is not purely mechanical. Some of what feels like tightness is a system that no longer has good instructions for a position it stopped visiting. I want to be careful here, because this is a topic with a great deal of confident nonsense attached to it. Stretching does not lengthen your fascia in any meaningful structural sense, and it does not flush anything out of your tissues. What regular movement through a range does is more modest and more real. It maintains tolerance and control in positions you would otherwise lose access to. There is also a compounding effect worth understanding. When a range becomes unfamiliar, you begin avoiding it. Not consciously, but because it feels awkward. Avoiding it removes the last remaining reason your body had to maintain it. So the range narrows further, and the avoidance deepens. That loop runs quietly for years, and most people only notice at the moment they genuinely need the position and discover it is not available. And the practical version is not a formal stretching routine, which most people abandon anyway. It is periodically visiting the ranges your daily life stopped requiring. Reach fully overhead when you put something on a high shelf, rather than avoiding the shelf. Rotate deliberately when you turn to look behind you. Bend more deeply than usual when you pick something up, if your knees and hips allow it. Move an ankle through its full circle. And if you can safely get down to the floor and back up, that single ability is worth protecting, because it is the one people lose first and miss most. As always, if you have joint disease, a replacement, recent surgery, or significant balance problems, the safe version of this belongs with a physical therapist rather than with a video. Now we leave muscles and joints entirely, because the next signal determines whether activation ever really ends. Your body is designed to activate. That part is not a problem. A stressful event raises your heart rate, sharpens your attention, and mobilizes energy. That response is useful and it is supposed to happen. The interesting question is not whether you activate. It is whether your body ever receives a clear signal that the activation is over. Follow an ordinary afternoon. A difficult phone call ends at 4. The event is finished. The conversation is over. But then you read the news, then you answer messages, then something else needs attention. The evening is bright, something stimulating is on the screen. You go directly from that to bed. The stressful event ended hours ago. The physiological state never received a clean ending. And here is the distinction that makes this useful. A resilient nervous system is not one that never activates. It is one that reliably comes back down. That returning is an active process. Heart rate falls, blood pressure settles, attention broadens, and the body shifts back toward repair and digestion. But it needs conditions. It happens far more readily when input decreases than when input simply continues at a lower level. There is a useful way to notice this in yourself, and it requires no equipment. After something stressful ends, check whether your body actually registers the ending. Are your shoulders down? Has your breathing changed? Or are you sitting in a quiet room with the same physiology you had during the phone call? Most people ask that question honestly, discover the ending never arrive. I want to be honest about the limits here, because this area attracts overstatement. No breathing technique instantly switches off your stress hormones, and anyone claiming that is overselling. What repeated transitions can do is give your body a reliable pattern. After this, things get quieter, and after 60 this matters more, because activation that never resolves tends to bleed into sleep, which then compromises the recovery that would have resolved it. The practical version is a repeated transition rather than a technique. Something that consistently marks the boundary between stimulation and recovery. A walk without your phone. Slower breathing for a few minutes. Turning the lights down. Ending news intake at a set hour. The specific choice matters far less than the repetition. You are teaching your body where the ending is, and the final habit seems unrelated to aging entirely, until you consider what that tissue is exposed to every single day. The last place most people look for a signal about their body's condition is their gums. Here is the situation. Your gums sit against a dense bacterial community that never leaves. That is normal. But when the balance shifts and the tissue becomes chronically inflamed, something changes in kind, not just in degree. Gum inflammation is not a sealed local event. The tissue is richly supplied with blood vessels, and it is inflamed continuously, not for a week, but for years, which makes advanced gum disease a source of chronic inflammatory burden, running quietly in the background. Now I need to be careful, because this topic generates some of the worst health claims on the internet. Gum disease does not cause heart attacks. Flossing does not prevent dementia. Anyone telling you otherwise is going well past the evidence. Major dental organizations are explicit about this. Associations between periodontitis and cardiovascular disease have been observed repeatedly, and a causal relationship has not been established. That is an honest description, and it is still worth knowing. But there is one relationship where the evidence goes considerably further, and it is the one most relevant here. Periodontal disease and diabetes have an established bidirectional relationship. Each one makes the other harder to manage. Poor blood sugar control worsens gum disease, and gum disease appears to make blood sugar control more difficult in return. What makes this different from a simple association is that it has been tested. Multiple systematic reviews of intervention studies found that successfully treating periodontal disease produced measurable improvements in blood sugar control in people with type 2 diabetes. Treating the mouth changed a number measured in the blood. That is a meaningful finding, and it is why this belongs in a conversation about aging. There is one more reason this belongs in a conversation about aging specifically. Gum disease is largely painless until it is advanced. It does not announce itself the way a cavity does, which means it is one of the few chronic inflammatory conditions a person can carry for a decade without ever having a symptom that demands attention. So the practical version is not dramatic, and it is genuinely accessible. Brush properly. Clean between your teeth, which is the part most people skip and where gum disease usually begins. Keep up professional dental care, especially if you have diabetes. And do not treat bleeding gums as normal. Bleeding when you brush is not a sign that you brush too hard. It is usually a sign of inflammation. Persistent bleeding, swelling, pain, receding gums, or teeth that feel loose are reasons to be seen, not reasons to brush more gently. So look back at what these 6 habits actually have in common. None of them is an anti-aging intervention. Not one of them makes you younger in any literal sense. What they share is that each one keeps a different signal clear. Your body knows what time it is. Incoming fuel gets used. Physical capacity is still requested. Movement options are still visited. Activation reliably ends. And one source of chronic inflammation is not left to run indefinitely. Aging is not a single process that shuts everything down at the same rate. What actually happens in a declining body is that the signals blur. Day and night become similar. Meals are followed by stillness. Daily life stops asking for effort. Movement narrows to a few familiar shapes. Stress never receives an ending. Inflammation runs unattended. None of that is the calendar. All of it is the environment surrounding the calendar. And notice that none of these 6 require you to be athletic or wealthy or to reorganize your life. Going outside in the morning, standing up after dinner, taking the stairs you already have, reaching overhead, turning the lights down, cleaning between your teeth. The reason they work is not that they are powerful individually. It is that each one is a signal a system was waiting for. And the calendar is the part you cannot change. The goal was never to convince your body that it is 30, that is not available, and pretending otherwise wastes your attention. The goal is to keep reminding it that adaptation is still necessary, because your body is always preparing for the life it expects you to live next. What it expects depends entirely on what you keep asking it to do.